Konnichiwa Mina, and for the first time since September 19th, PFA is finally back as we get ready for the 2017 PFA season. Oh, what a long wait it's been, as we're getting ready for week 1, which is the week of August 20th to 21st of 2017. So we'll start things off by looking at the standings based upon where they ended last year, remember. Washington won the division, Omaha won their division, Birmingham won theirs, then Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, Chicago, New Orleans, and San Diego, with Denver and Phoenix being the wild card teams in the National Conference, and Baltimore and Miami being the wild card teams in the Century Conference. So I'm quite interested to see how this week is gonna go. So now let's go take a look at the schedule. Also, here's a new feature added to the schedule where I have the odds of each team winning. So our first game this year is going to be the divisional rival San Diego at Atlanta, with Atlanta having a 61.1% chance of winning. Then Cincinnati at Baltimore, who has an 80.9% chance of winning. San Diego at Birmingham, the two is going to have go at, with Birmingham having a 72.6% chance of winning. Cleveland at Boston, with Boston having a 69% chance. Columbus at Detroit having 70.8%. Miami at Houston, 53.8%. Washington at 54.7%. Hawaii at Milwaukee with 60.2%. Or Louisville at Orlando at 71.1%. And then finally the last 1 p.m. game, Jacksonville at Tampa, with Tampa having a 56.4%. And then the 4 p.m. games, Minneapolis going to Chicago, a 75% chance for Chicago. Kansas City at Denver has a 58.5%. Oakland at Los Angeles, 75%. Omaha at New Orleans, Omaha has a 51.7%. And Portland at Phoenix, 69.5% for Phoenix. Buffalo at Pittsburgh, 77.1% for Pittsburgh. El Paso at Seattle with 58.2% for Seattle. And then the Sunday night game, Las Vegas at San Francisco, with San Francisco having a 60.8%. And Philadelphia at Dallas, with Dallas having a 68.7% chance of winning. So now, let's finally get to the first game of the season to get this season underway. And we start off with the first game of the year, and that's the San Diego Longhorns going to the Atlanta Trojans. These two are division rivals, and they had an offensive shutout last year both times, but Atlanta won both of them, so San Antonio has never won a game yet between them, as the Georgia Dome is still around in this universe, as the Trojans are continuing to play in that. So here we go, the highlights for the first game of the season. And in another offensive shootout, San Diego would finally win to get their first win over Atlanta, as their quarterback Glenn Chen was 17 of 28, 190 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks, but 2 rushing touchdowns too. That was pretty good. And Atlanta's quarterback Cody Perry was 16 of 34 for 320 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. San Antonio running back Elvis Smith had 22 attempts for 114 yards and a touchdown, as Atlanta's wide receiver Christopher Eaton had 4 receptions for 136 yards and a touchdown, and Joseph Eames, their main receiver, had 4 receptions, 133 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And Atlanta linebacker Patrick Stevenson had 10 tackles, a sack, and a forced fumble, which unfortunately for Atlanta was not enough, as like I said, San Antonio wins 38-31. What a nice comeback for PFA this year. So now, off to the next game, as it's another divisional showdown as Cincinnati visits Baltimore. As you remember last year on Sunday night when Cincinnati visited Baltimore, Baltimore crushed them 37-7. Well, let's see how well they do here, as Baltimore is one of my favorites to host me. I'm playing PFA Bowl 2. And in a surprise, Baltimore would take overtime to win, as they won 12-9 in a defensive shootout. Oh my goodness, that is unbelievable, as Cincinnati's running back Quentin Pearson had 27 attempts for 109 yards, and Baltimore's kicker, Anthony Barrett, oh my god, his first game was not good, as he missed a field goal in the 4th quarter that could have won it right then and there. And he also missed the extra point for their touchdown, which could have also won the game right there too. So, thankfully for them, he was able to get in overtime, but man, that's pretty bad. what a big day it was on defense, as Cincinnati's strong safety Charles Light had 12 tackles and a sack. Baltimore's linebacker Curtis Dick had 12 tackles, and Baltimore safety Juan Pike had 11 tackles and 2 sacks. How about that for a safety? So Baltimore squeaked out a victory, but man, that's very concerning that they took overtime to be a team that they should have easily crushed. Especially now that they're going to have 2 away games for the next 2 weeks. Then we go off to our first outer conference game, as it's the matchup between the number 3 seeds last year, as it's San Diego visiting Birmingham. What an interesting showdown this will be, as San Diego was one of the lucky teams that shouldn't have made the playoffs but somehow did. And Birmingham, oh boy, with that very good defense, might be number 1 this year, making them one of my favorites in the National Conference to play in PFA Bowl 2. And Birmingham would win 17-3 in a defensive holdout, as both quarterbacks did terrible, because both have a new quarterback, remember, in the first round. So there's going to probably be calls maybe soon to maybe plug them in. But how about this? 9 sacks by Birmingham and 3 forced fumbles. Man, their defense was very busy today, as their linebacker Christopher Vela had 16 tackles, which is the 8th most tackles in a game in PFA history. And their cornerback, Jacob Taylor, had 7 tackles and 2 interceptions, with one of them being a pick 6. And their defensive tackle, Darren Millan, had 4 tackles, 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, which one of them got recovered. And those 3 sacks give him the 3rd most sacks in a game in PFA history. So wow, that defense did an unbelievable job today. And that defense, they were number 2 last year. Could this be enough to maybe start them off with the number 1 defense? We're going to have to wait and see, as Birmingham also continues the longest win streak in PFA at the moment, with 8 coming from 7 from last year as well. Then we go up north to Gillette Stadium, as Boston will host Cleveland in another divisional showdown. Let's see how well these two do. And Cleveland would spank Boston 24-3, as Cleveland actually knocked out their starting quarterback Sterling Osborne for the game, and his backup did not really do so well in his absence, as Cleveland's quarterback Scott Hernandez was 24-35, 265 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their running back Peter Pierce had 24 attempts for 102 yards, and their star wide receiver Gerald Todd had 5 receptions for 116 yards, and their linebacker Christopher Quintana had 11 tackles. So wow, what a destruction Boston had received against Cleveland, because remember, last year Cleveland was supposed to be the best team in PFA, only the injury bug affected them pretty badly, and of course had them go out to finish 7-11. The way they played here against Boston, who I think swept them last year, could Cleveland be coming back as a team to be reckoned with in the National Conference? We'll have to wait and see, as this is just 1 game. But man, what an epic destruction for Boston that was. Then we go out west, as the Columbus Barons will visit the Detroit Engines in Ford Field. What an incredible game this is going to be. Very interesting too, as remember, Detroit still has a losing streak that's been going for like 10 games now, and Columbus is an interesting team that can't stop losing a lot, so something's going to break here. And Detroit would win 24-13, ending their 11-game losing streak, which was the longest in franchise history, and also the longest of any team that have ever won a game. And of course, that was the 3rd longest losing streak ever, behind Louisville and Tampa's, as they actually knocked out Columbus quarterback Alfred Hendrick out of the game before he made a pass, as his backup Mike Frogatti, oh my god, was 24-45 for 279 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 picks. Oh my goodness, they really pressured him. And to make matters worse, Hendrick is going to be out the next 2 weeks due to a fractured hip. So, man, Columbus is not starting off good, especially since they still have no idea if Hendrick is the quarterback of the future. And how about this too? Detroit's rookie quarterback that they plugged in immediately, Charles Cunningham, was 8 of 26, which is not only 30%, but in 149 yards, but he threw 3 touchdowns and a pick. So that's really, really weird how that happened, that he threw 3 touchdowns but only made 30% of his passes. And 9 sacks by Columbus, so their defense did a lot of pressure today, especially their linebacker William LaFleur, who had 3 sacks, which moves him 4th most in the game for sacks. And, of course, Detroit cornerback Ronald Wheeler had 2 tackles and 2 picks. That was an awesome game. So good job for Detroit to finally end their 11-game losing streak. We'll see how well they go compared to last year. Remember when they started off 5-2 before they began their streak. And Columbus, oh boy, they got a lot of problems to deal with, especially at quarterback. Now we go south to Houston as the Houston Twisters host their division rival Miami Sharks, as Miami is one of my favorites to play in PFA Bowl 2. But of course, they're going to have to start off the season on a hard note playing against Houston, who they did beat last year in Houston, but it was a comeback too. So let's see what happens this time around, as the stadium is indoors this time around to make the crowd noise louder. But Miami would win 27-10 in a blowout as their quarterback Anthony McCormick continued to look sharp at the end, compared just like last year. 24-37, 300 yards, and 3 touchdowns. How about that? And their 2 main wide receivers were busy today, as Edward Miller had 8 receptions for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Victor Green had 115 yards and from 6 receptions and a touchdown too. Houston linebacker Juan McKnight had a very big day, 17 tackles and a sack, which would put him in the top 10 for most tackles in a game. And of course, their defensive end, Jesse Rutherford, had 12 tackles and a sack. So they got a lot of pressure on Miami today, but in the end, it wasn't enough, as Miami would destroy Houston today. And now Miami's going to have 2 primetime games the next 2 weeks. So maybe they can go all the way to 3-0, perhaps. Then we go up to East Rutherford, New Jersey, as we have a rematch from Week 1 last year, too. How funny these two would meet up again, as the Washington Americans visit the Manhattan Greens. Remember last year, Manhattan had a lead, but they blew it thanks to a whole bunch of offensive mistakes allowed Washington to get the victory. And the weather much better last year, because remember last year it was storms every place. Today it's a clear 80-degree day. So here's the results. Manhattan would have a 20-0 lead at one point to go on to win 23-16, as even though they struggled a bit on offense, they still were able to hold down Washington's weak offense, as their quarterback Jamie Norwood was 17 of 26, 215 yards and a touchdown, and their wide receiver David Neto had 5 receptions, 117 yards and a touchdown. Linebacker Juan Jones had 12 tackles. And defensive end Wilton Getz had 7 tackles and 3 sacks, which moves him 5th all time for most sacks in the game. So wow, this week has been nothing but sacks all over the place. This is incredible. So, and of course, Manhattan will get the revenge from last year, along with their first win over division rival Washington. So congratulations on them for that. Then we go back up north to Milwaukee, as is Hawaii visiting Milwaukee in a very interesting showdown between 2 teams that have a lot of talent, but they kind of disappoint at the same time. So here's the results. Hawaii would destroy Milwaukee 31-14 as they knocked out Milwaukee's quarterback Herman McLendon, and they actually broke his ribs, so he's going to be out the next 8 to 12 weeks for another major week-long injury just like last year. And of course, you'd think with their backup quarterback John Addison, who's like the best backup in the league, you'd think he'd do good coming right in. Well, unfortunately, not really, as he was 12 of 23, 210 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. So, not really that impressive, as Hawaii's quarterback Richard Clough was 21 of 31 for 252 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. And their wide receiver Aaron Fay had 4 receptions for 106 yards. And Milwaukee's linebacker Richard Herron had 12 tackles and a sack. And how about this too? Remember, Hawaii has the best linebacker in the league, Wilson Sharp, but even he had a quiet day with just 8 tackles. That's quite surprising. But hey, Milwaukee got a big win today, as next Monday night down in Oklahoma is not going to be easy. Then we're heading south to Orlando, as Orlando will host Louisville in a very interesting game. As remember, Louisville has the #1 pick. Remember, their quarterback Stanford Fink, who's going to start here, and of course, being in a storm. Maybe it'll be, I can't remember if Camp World Field has turf or not, so this could be a humongous mud bowl, so it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the storm. And Orlando would win 19-0 in, I believe, their very first shutout ever, as Stanford Fink in his first game was 16 of 31 for 131 yards. So, yeah, he did not really do so good, unfortunately, as Frank Evans, Orlando's running back, with 24 attempts, 103 yards, and a touchdown. And Louisville's linebacker, Larry Mercier, had 17 tackles. And, of course, look at this. Orlando running back Charles McCarty had 8 tackles, but 4 sacks and a safety. So that 4 sacks now gives him 3rd most sacks in a game in PFA history now. How about that for an impressive day? And this is also the 10th lowest scoring game in PFA history with only 19 points scored. So how about that for an interesting feat? Good job for Orlando getting their shutout. And of course, Stanford Fink. I know it's just one game and all, but Orlando doesn't really have that good of a defense, so that's a little bit of a concern. Meanwhile, down in Tampa, they don't have the storms, but they still have the clouds from that storm over in Orlando, as the division rivals Jacksonville and Tampa will square off now. The game was close until the 4th quarter, as Jacksonville would win 34-17, and their quarterback, Michael Witters, oh my god, he was 15 of 18, 326 yards, and 3 touchdowns, and he had a perfect QB reign, maybe for the first time ever in PFA history, as their wide receiver, Desmond Haggard, had 4 receptions, 109 yards, and a touchdown. Tampa wide receiver Edward Gavin had 6 receptions and 112 yards. And then, oh my god, look at this! Tampa's defensive end, Robert Hoskins, one of the best defensive ends in the league. 15 tackles, 8 sacks, which is the most in PFA history by the player in sacks this game. That is unbelievable. That doubles the previous record of 4. Oh my goodness. And Jacksonville suffered 12 sacks today, with 3/4 of them coming, 2/3 coming from Hoskins alone. That is unbelievable. And that was almost half of his sacks from last year alone he got in one game. And finally, the only good defensive player on Jacksonville's squad, their free safety David Stock, had 11 tackles and a forced fumble. So wow, what an impressive game for Jacksonville. We'll see if they can continue that momentum up next week. Then we go to the 4 p.m. games, and oh boy, what an incredible showdown we're going to get things started, as the arch rivals Minneapolis visit Chicago in the rain. And Chicago's first game since losing PFA Bowl 1 with Matthew Smart back. We'll see how well they do against this stinging defense. Chicago would win 21-10 against their arch rivals, as they managed to avoid their PFA Bowl hangover for at least a week at the moment. And Matthew Smart, in his first game back since the conference championship against Pittsburgh last year, was 26 of 38 for 185 yards and a touchdown and a pick. So he did not really have his best game coming back, but oh my goodness. Samuel Clark, the starting quarterback for Minneapolis, was terrible in this game. He was so bad, especially since the defense almost pulled it off for them. I think they're going to have a call soon of the team to eventually plug in their new starting quarterback that their new quarterback they took in the first round of the draft. So that's going to be very interesting to see, as Samuel Clark obviously still hasn't really recovered from his injury either. Minneapolis strong safety Terrence McCormick had 10 tackles. Minneapolis defensive end Donald Lewis had 7 tackles, a sack, and 3 forced fumbles. Sucks he couldn't recover even one of them. That's pretty bad. And star defensive end for Chicago, Alfred Helms, had 9 tackles, 3 sacks, which makes him 7th most all-time in a game. And of course, their cornerback, Jeremy Conley, had 4 tackles and a pick 6, which proved to be very decisive for this game. So Chicago got a very moralizing boost and win here against their arch rival to hopefully hold off the hangover, but we'll have to wait and see what happens, as Minneapolis is not in pretty good shape. At least they still got their defense, hopefully to get them their wins. Next we go out west, as the Kansas City Hammerheads visit the Denver Miners in another outer conference showdown in a stormy day in Denver too, between 2 teams that have win records, and of course Denver being one of my favorites to win the National Conference title to host me playing PFA Bowl 2. But Denver would blow it as they got destroyed 23-10, as Henry Settles, the quarterback of the Hammerheads, remember, who was their number 1 pick last year, had a really good game finally. 20 of 27 for 228 yards, 2 touchdowns in the pick. Zachary Ellis, remember, who was that star out of nowhere last year, was 19 of 35 for 160 yards and 1 touchdown, 1 pick. So yeah, didn't really do that good. Kansas City strong safety Virgil Coble had 11 tackles, a sack, and a pick. And Denver linebacker Henry Dent had 11 tackles and a sack. So a surprising victory for Kansas City, especially since they got to go to Miami next week. But what a disappointing loss for Denver. And they might fall to 1-2 when they go to Indianapolis next Sunday night, 2 weeks from now. So this was a surprising loss for Denver. Then we go down to Los Angeles as they host the Oakland Majors in another divisional showdown. And of course, this is the first opportunity we're going to get to finally see Ruben Williams, see how well he does after that trade with the Union last May. And Los Angeles would win in a defensive showdown 10-9, making it one of the lowest scoring games in PFA history, but not number 10 since Louisville at Orlando took that earlier. And Ricky Williams, the quarterback for Oklahoma, in his first game as a starter for him, 14 of 24, 185 yards and an interception. That really was not good, as Los Angeles running back John Fox had 35 attempts, 115 yards. Sucks he couldn't get a touchdown off of it too. And Oakland linebacker Boyd Fernandez had 12 tackles and a sack, and Los Angeles linebacker Julius Searcy had 12 tackles and 3 sacks, which gives him the 8th most sacks of all time in the game. So Los Angeles once again beats Oakland in Los Angeles for the second year in a row. And hopefully this rough start will be fixed next week for Oakland when they go to Manhattan. Then we go down to the Bayou for a very interesting showdown and a rematch from last year as the defending champion Omaha Thunder visit the New Orleans Jazz in a rematch from last year. Remember, Omaha visited New Orleans like in week 17, I believe it was, when they were still undefeated and they got their first loss of the season in quite an embarrassing fashion too. So, how will Omaha do as a defending champion? Will they get their revenge, or will New Orleans get some revenge after the last 2 disappointing losses they had last year? And Omaha would get the revenge as they win 24-10, start off 1-0 as a defending champion. And Archie Marvin was 24-31, 279 yards and 3 touchdowns. And New Orleans quarterback James Williams actually was 22 of 33 for 173 yards and a touchdown. And of course, their linebacker Jeremy Cornell had 12 tackles. So they actually got a lot of pressure on Archie Marvin. And New Orleans, although they got blown out by the score, as you can see, they actually held on pretty good in comparison to how they played against Orlando and Baltimore in the wild card last year. Oh my God, they were terrible. But of course, this looks like it's going to be a tough season for New Orleans. But hey, Omaha off to a good start after the defending champion. Then we go out to Glendale as we have another divisional round showdown as the Portland Dragons visit the Phoenix Storm, a rematch from last year. Because remember, Phoenix destroyed Portland last year, 34-0, and I think it was the second most lopsided game in PFA history. What will happen this year? It wasn't a blowout, but Phoenix still won 31-20. Portland almost made a comeback until Phoenix closed out in the fourth quarter as Portland's quarterback Frederick Van Dyke was 14 of 26, 241 yards and 2 touchdowns. James Kearse, how about this? The Phoenix's quarterback was 26 of 33, 391 yards, 4 touchdowns and a pick. And their running back David Sexton had 28 attempts, 152 yards. Man, this offense was clicking as they both had a 100-yard receiver too in this game. And of course, Portland's linebackers were very busy today as they both got 14 and 13 tackles, with one of them getting a sack. So Portland got a lot of pressure today on Phoenix, but in the end it still was not enough to get a win. Then we go out east as it's another divisional showdown with the Buffalo Sabres visiting the Pittsburgh Blitz. These two last met in the last round of the playoffs, regular season last year. Remember where Pittsburgh had a 21-0 lead going in the third quarter, and they blew for Buffalo to tie it up and then win it in overtime. So will Pittsburgh get the revenge? And they will, as they ended up winning 13-0 as Cruz Tolbert, their starting quarterback. Since remember Billy White, they actually have him benched, second string at the moment. They had Cruz Tolbert back, and he didn't really do good. But Ricky Bale, oh my God, he was absolutely even worse. This was all defensive showdown as Pittsburgh's running back Frederick Robinson had 30 attempts, 103 yards, and a touchdown. And their wide receiver Gary Berry had 7 receptions for 102 yards. And Buffalo linebacker James Ferris had 10 tackles and a forced fumble. So Pittsburgh got their revenge, but Of course, that wasn't really a good win in comparison. They're going to have a lot of trouble when they play Omaha next week. Then we go out west again, as we're out in Seattle, as the El Paso Mustangs visit their division rival Seattle Quakes, and we'll see how well they do here. And Seattle will beat El Paso once again 13-3 as their quarterback. Remember, their last year's quarterback they actually cut, and his backup from last year, Ken Rodriguez, who was really good last year, has been started for right now. He was 10 of 7 for 133 yards before he was knocked out of the game to a jammed finger. He'll be back next week. But their number 1 pick this year, Josh Tucker, came in, and he was 9 of 15 for 116 yards and 1 touchdown. Not bad for a rookie without a practice. But man, James Fabinox, the quarterback for El Paso, who was supposed to be like one of the best QBs last year, continues his terrible collapse, throwing over 2 picks in this game. Seattle's 2 wide receivers, Johnny Cash and Eric Benjamin, both were very busy today with over 100 yards, including Benjamin getting over 120 yards. Seattle linebacker James Torres had 19 tackles, which is the most and second most in the game, a sack and a forced fumble. And free safety Hector Lee had 7 tackles and 2 picks. So, not bad for Seattle, such a defensive effort, so we'll see if Ken Rodriguez will be able to play next week. But man, El Paso is in a deep hole, and I don't know if they're going to be able to recover. Looks like they're not going to be able to recover this year, unlike Cleveland so far. But hey, it's still early in the year, so who knows what will happen. Then we go out to Santa Clara for our first Sunday night game of the year as the Las Vegas Gamblers visit the San Francisco Union and another divisional showdown. And San Francisco would take overtime to beat Las Vegas as they had a 21-3 lead before Las Vegas tied it up before they finally won in overtime. And man, John Getz, who is the quarterback for San Francisco, not looking so good for the people who still want Ruben Williams, as he was 32 of 53, 272 yards, 2 touchdowns, but 3 picks. He definitely didn't look good. Anthony Marks, their running back, had 26 carries, 133 yards, and a touchdown. And James Beverly, Las Vegas' linebacker, had 25 attempts for 100 yards. John Maxwell, Las Vegas' wide receiver, had 4 receptions, 110 yards, and a touchdown. And San Francisco defensive end Charles Mangusa had 10 tackles, 4 sacks, which is 5th most all-time in the game. And, of course, their Las Vegas' strong safety, Chris Dallas, had 18 tackles, right up there for the most of all time in a game, and a pick. So amazing comeback for Las Vegas, but wasn't enough to beat San Francisco. And man, the Union has a lot of fans, especially on the Ruben Williams camp. They're definitely going to be very skeptical how John Getz is going to do this season. And then we get to the final game of the week as we go down to the Cotton Bowl in Dallas on Monday night, and a very hot and stormy night as the Philadelphia Hawks visit the Dallas Stars. And how interesting matchup, just like last year with the Americans, it's going to look like an Eagles-Cowboys showdown. And Dallas would once again win their first game of the year as they beat Philadelphia 27-20, as their quarterback Troy Hill was 26 of 36 for 228 yards and a touchdown. And Leroy Black, Philadelphia's quarterback, who was like one of the best quarterbacks in the league, didn't really do good today. 18 of 27, 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. Dallas running back Justin Becker was 25 carries for 107 yards and a touchdown, and Philadelphia's quarterback Everett Shapiro had 3 receptions, 103 yards, and a touchdown, and both of them had a linebacker that got 12 tackles today. So, a very impressive start for Dallas to start the year once again for 2nd year in a row on Monday night. So with week 1 in the books, as we look at the standings in PFA in the National East, Cleveland has a tiebreaker over Manhattan for the moment. Omaha has the 1-game lead over Indianapolis in the National Central. San Antonio has the tiebreaker over Jacksonville in the National South, and Phoenix has the tiebreaker over Los Angeles in the National West. In the Century Conference, Pittsburgh has a tiebreaker over Baltimore in the Century East. Chicago has the tiebreaker over Kansas City in the Century Central. Miami has a tiebreaker over Dallas in the Century South. And San Francisco has a tiebreaker over Seattle in the Century West. So as you see, Indianapolis and Oklahoma did not play this week. They will be playing next week, including Oklahoma making their Monday night debut next week. So here's the playoff standings right now in the National Conference. At the season end today, San Antonio and Phoenix would have the byes, and it would be Manhattan going to Cleveland and Jacksonville going to Omaha. So Omaha, how about that for the first week of the playoffs? If they want to begin their division title, they have to start all the way in the wild card round, As you see, everyone's still in contention for at least like the first 10 to 11 weeks of the season in the National Conference. Then we go over to the Century Conference, as this time around the moment, it's Miami and San Francisco with the byes, with Baltimore going to Chicago, a rematch from last year's divisional round, the wild card, and Seattle going to Pittsburgh. As, of course, we have 4 teams with a win, 1-0 at the moment, out of the playoff mix for the moment. So that's how the stands are in the National Conference as well. Now, as we finish off, we're going to look at the Week 2 schedule, as the odds will be put in next week when you see them then. And if you want to see them later on, go check them on the site once I make them, because this is a lot of work to make the odds for who wins the game. So anyways, the 1 p.m. games will be Baltimore going to Buffalo, another divisional showdown. Then El Paso going to Columbus. That'll be interesting to see if El Paso can recover, and how will Columbus do without Alfred Kendrick for the first couple games. And Minneapolis going to Detroit, another divisional round showdown. Atlanta going to Indianapolis, who are going to make their first game this week. And this will be interesting. Seattle going to Jacksonville. High-powered offense from Jacksonville against maybe a very stingy Seattle defense. We'll see about that. Denver going to Louisville. Denver has to win this if they want to be able to keep up with everyone in the National Conference for the PFA Bowl title. That's hard to believe. After 1 week, they're already getting concerned. And then the interesting one, Oakland going to Manhattan. Ruben Williams really has to recover it big time here. Cincinnati going to Milwaukee. We'll see how John Addison does with their starting quarterback down for most of the season. Chicago going to New Orleans. Dallas going to Orlando. Birmingham going to Tampa. Los Angeles going to Washington to finish off the 1 p.m. games. Then we get to the 4 p.m. games. San Francisco going to Las Vegas, a rematch from just this week. And then, of course, the big showdown is Omaha will make their home debut this year as they play the Pittsburgh Blitz in what could have been a national PFA Bowl showdown, remember. Philadelphia going to Boston, Cleveland going to San Diego, and how about this for an interesting showdown? San Antonio going to Phoenix for the last 4 p.m. game. And then the Sunday night game, Kansas City at Miami. I didn't think this was going to mean much, but hey, with Kansas City win, now it has a lot on the line. That'll be very interesting. And the final game of August 2, the upcoming Monday night game, Hawaii going to Oklahoma, which will be very interesting to see how that happens. Well, I don't know about you, but I am so happy that PFA is back after finally, for the first time since September 19th, almost a year ago since PFA Bowl 1 was done. So Week 1 is now in the books. I'm looking forward to hopefully doing Week 2, as I'm sure all of you are. And it's so great that PFA is back and hopefully better than ever. So see you sometime soon, hopefully, for 2017 PFA season Week 2. So until then, done it. And of course, go and at the end of each video for the last 20 seconds, you'll see the upcoming week when it's out, and then last week's video too, along with the 2017 PFA season playlist. So hopefully you enjoyed watching them too. So see you soon for Week 2 of PFA.